Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. If you thought we were done with this franchise, we're not. Michael Bay has stepped aside. He also didn't do Bumblebee, so it's not that surprising, but this time we got Stephen Caple Jr. And from the looks of how this film goes, we are far from seeing the last Transformers film. Now, I really enjoyed the first one. It's probably a lot of nostalgia speaking because I was in high school at the time. I saw it, I think, like 3 times in theaters the summer of '07. But I still believe out of all the Michael Bay movies, that movie is still so far above the other ones. Then Bumblebee came along, which was a surprise to me and I know many others, and it was this much more heartfelt movie. It was less about the action and the overall alien race of the Transformers, and more just this human connection between a girl and her car, which was really beautiful. This film feels like a combination of a lot of those things. We definitely have that human-car relationship now with Anthony Ramos, and wait for it, Mirage, played by Pete Davidson. Pete Davidson has become the modern Shia LaBeouf, meaning he is in every single major franchise at this point. He's a part of the DC universe. We've seen him now in the Fast and Furious universe. He's been a part of the Kardashian cinematic universe and now Transformers. So yeah, the central core of this film is centered around his relationship with Anthony Ramos. And look, I love Anthony Ramos in a lot of things that he does. I'm not convinced though that he's enough to kind of lead this franchise forward. Luckily, Dominic Fishback is also in this, and I am an even bigger fan of hers. She really does the best she can though, because the role she's playing is such an archetype that we've seen in other action films, which is pretty much just this smart character that's spouting off a bunch of terminology that it hopes goes over the audience's head, because if you think about it too much, none of it actually means anything. I wrote down my favorite object in this film. It was the transwarp control panel. Outside of the human element, we get a lot of action. Not as much necessarily as Michael Bay gave us in his films, and I think depending on how you feel about his style of filmmaking will determine if you thought this was a better version of that or not. This is much more clean, much more clear cut, and it's easy to follow what everyone is doing within these action sequences. You can keep up with what is actually happening on screen. It's not just these big giant explosions. And while I appreciate that, there was definitely part of me that missed the big cheesy explosions. But I think it's for the best, because now Michael Bay can go on to direct movies like Ambulance, which I think is a much better use of his skill and talent. My biggest issue with this film is I think that after seeing the way that Michael Bay was received with his Transformers films, they just wanted to play it extremely safe with this one. And I think they kind of overcorrected to a point where it's actually kind of boring. The MacGuffin here is huge, being this key that apparently leads them back to their home planet, but also causes this god to come down and rule the entire universe. It's the most generic stakes possible with the most generic way to solve it all. At this point, if you just Google the term MacGuffin, you pretty much just see a reference point for all the Transformer films, whether it's a cube, a key, a sword, some glasses. These films are not remembered for their well thought out plots, unless the plots are extremely bad. And I think that's where the last couple Michael Bay films got really kind of clunky and messy, when we were dealing with King Arthur and our planet being a Transformer. And so this is an extremely conservative way to tell a Transformer story. Extremely conservative to the point where it felt like we were just using a lot of recycled action lines and sequences that we've seen from just hit action movies. So yes, it's technically well done, and you can't really poke too much at the plot, but it's only because they covered themselves with such a large safety net and didn't really take any risks with it. The final action set piece especially kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because it's another one of these generic, just gray flatlands that we've seen so much in films lately. I really blame the late 2000s to early 2010s, where we just saw so many cities being blown up, especially within the Transformers films, but also the Avengers and Man of Steel. And I think the internet just kind of got really critical with it, trying to add up all the damage and hold these people accountable. Like, you can't just blow up cities this much. And so what we've seen for the past couple of years now is all these final battles just take place in boring locations where there's no innocent bystanders to be harmed. I think Endgame is the perfect example, and I do love that movie, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of what we've seen in every single one. We've seen it in Justice League, we've seen it in the Fast and Furious movies, and now we see another Transformers movie where the final set piece is just boring. I just never thought I'd reach a place where I'm just asking Michael Bay to come back and just blow up cities again. I'm also a tad confused on where this falls in within the whole Transformers franchise. The Bumblebee movie is referenced, so I know at least these two films go together, and I always kind of assumed Bumblebee was a prequel to that. But there definitely are some things that don't quite add up, and I don't really care to look into it too much. I'm just curious if they are going to connect it a lot more, or if this is just going to be a completely standalone reboot. They could really go either way. This film does take place in the 90s, and let me tell you, they want to remind you every 5 minutes that this is the 90s. There's references to Wu-Tang Clan, Mario, Marky Mark, so many shots of the Twin Towers, which honestly, I think at some point, we as a culture are going to have to reconcile how we just use the Twin Towers as a cheat code to show the audience what time period we're in. I'm just getting a little tired of this trend of throwing a film back in the 90s just for nostalgic value, because it doesn't actually add anything to the plot. It's just an excuse to use all these throwbacks as needle drops. And there were several moments where I really rolled my eyes when a song kicked in right when the fight scene started. There were actually a lot of parts in the movie that I was rolling my eyes at, and my audience was laughing a lot during this film. Very much ironically, and not because the filmmakers wanted them to laugh at these parts. So I'm definitely curious if this is going to work on the general audience, because my theater, I don't think, loved it. However, the bummer is I don't think I would encourage anyone to go see this film, except the final scene, the final shot of this film is one of the most interesting things I've ever seen in any sort of franchise. I don't want to spoil it beyond that, but you could walk away thinking two things. You could see this scene and just have all your childhood dreams come through in a way that you never imagined was possible on screen. Or you could be a little more cynical like me and just get really disheartened on this capitalistic way that we are making movies now, where everything just has to be this crossover between IP, franchises, toy lines, you name it. I just think we're going to look back in 10 to 20 years at this moment in filmmaking and really kind of question how this all happened. How we allowed all these brands to create art for us that really exist for no more purpose than just to sell us more of their own brand. This movie really doesn't have anything to say or add to our current culture. I think a lot of people will enjoy their time in the theater because this is just a big, dumb popcorn flick. But I will be very shocked if anyone finds this film memorable at all within the next few years. That is until the next one comes out. So that's Transformers Rise of the Beast. Have you seen it? What do you think? Comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you next time.